Call it the Pentagon's worst nightmare. The debt deal just signed into law yesterday could force up to $850 billion in defense spending cuts over 10 years. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta issued a warning today saying congressional inaction would trigger, and I quote, a round of dangerous across-the-board defense cuts that would do real damage to our security. All right, here now to speak out on it, retired U.S. Army General and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Wesley Clark, Louisiana Republican Senator David Vitter, who is a member of the Senate Armed Forces Committee. General Clark, let me begin with you. I don't get this. The Defense Department is about 17% of the total U.S. budget, but it may have to shoulder 50% of the budgetary cuts now being scheduled. Will not this decimate our national security?
Well, you know that they won't have to shoulder it if Congress lives up to the agreement that was just passed. So there's no reason why Congress can't move into this second phase, the special commission come up with the cuts, Congress vote on, approve it, and the Pentagon budget is safe.
Well, all right, Senator Vitter, let me ask you the same question.
Sure, Larry.
Let me just add. Already, the Defense Department has taken $400 billion in cuts.
Right.
And locked in the box is another $350 billion. General Clark is right. It's only the trigger they have to worry about. But can they shoulder the $750 billion?
Well, Larry, they can't. These would be decimating cuts. But go back to the general's concern or statement. One of the reasons I voted against the plan is I think these triggers are not well calibrated at all. You know, the discussion for weeks leading up to this trigger idea is that they would be carefully crafted, carefully calibrated to scare the dickens out of both Democrats and Republicans and force action. I don't think they made that mark. I think they missed it very much. I do think those triggers are scaring the dickens out of Republicans, mostly because of this level of defense cuts. But I don't see anything comparable to really scare the Democrats and demand and ensure action. I'm very concerned that these triggers are not well calibrated.
Well, we don't have these kinds of painful triggers on domestic programs,
no.
For heaven's sakes. General
and so,
Clark,
Larry, the question is, you know, compared to most of the cuts being at the Pentagon, why is a deal which would clearly lessen that burden and mean more domestic discretionary cuts more favorable to Democrats? They're not going to like that more.
And
Medicare cuts were supposed to be what would get them in line, but the Medicare cuts are provider cuts, so they're not the sort of cuts to
I
really...
don't want to go too deep in that side. I want to stay in the defense. General Clark, overseas contingency operations, which we used to call the terror war, meaning Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, there's supposedly $1 trillion coming out of that baseline. It doesn't take effect for a few years. Is that realistic, General Clark? What if our troops need the money?
Well, I think it is realistic in terms of projecting ahead 10 years. But I'm confident this country, if our troops need the money, will find a way to get the money to the troops. I do think it's time to follow through on the pledge. Let's come out of Iraq unless the Iraqis can provide a really convincing way and explanation and funding to keep our troops there, as other countries do that have our troops, like Japan and South Korea. They provide host nation support, so should Iraq. And with respect to Afghanistan, we are coming out of there. We're going to have 30,000 troops out of there. Those costs should go down. We should be doing a lot more to take advantage of the economic opportunities that are presented for American companies in Afghanistan and Iraq. Both nations are rich in resources, and yet we find other nations quick to send their national oil companies in and extract copper and do other things in these countries. But we're not taking advantage of that, yet we paid in dollars and blood for security there.
Well, all right, that's tough stuff. Senator Vitter, let me ask you, can the Department of Homeland Security shoulder some of this? Will the State Department shoulder some of this? Will foreign aid shoulder this? Will our intelligence agencies shoulder this? And if they all do, what does it do to our defense and security posture at home and abroad?
Well, Larry, there's a big difference in terms of the definition of national security in the first tranche of cuts versus the second tranche. In the first tranche, it's broadly defined to include, for instance, Homeland Security. In the second tranche, where the defense would be cut 50%, it's narrowly defined, and for instance, Homeland Security in the definition, so it couldn't help share that big cut.
So the Bottom line is, you're saying we could afford the first tranche, phase one. It's the second trigger, the super committee trigger, that would be decimating to the defense budget. Is that your point, Senator?
Even the first tranche is disproportionate on national security. A third of the cuts, when, as you say, represents maybe 20% or less of the budget. But the second tranche, that imbalance is much more extreme.
All right, let us hope we don't have to go into that second tranche. General Wes Clark, thank you, sir. Senator David Vitter, we appreciate your time very much.
Thank you, Larry.
All right, I just want to reiterate, I hope we don't get to that second tranche trigger because it would destroy national security. I just can't imagine another $500 billion on top of the $750 billion in cuts. This is a serious issue. Last point, what's missing from the whole budget issue, where is the pro-growth tax reform to flatten rates and broaden the base and give us a new round of economic growth incentives? That's what we need, new incentives. I'm Larry Kudlow. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow night.